I'm reminded of the pastor who was in the hospital, and the chairman of the elders came to visit him. And the chairman told the pastor, he said, the elders voted 5-4 to pray for your recovery. And I'm thankful that our elders aren't like that. And I'm grateful to be here this morning to share this time with you. When I was in Brazil recently, I couldn't speak Portuguese. And there were 3 little girls that took it upon themselves to teach me Portuguese. And they went to the nursery and they got a book that they read to little kids in the nursery with all these Portuguese words. And they placed the book in my hands and they began to turn the pages and they began to point at the picture saying, elefante, professoro, and went through each word to help me understand the different words that corresponded to what I wanted to say. And I can begin to explain to you how I felt as a 68-year-old man having little girls treat me like I was 2. And sometimes in life, that can be a very humbling experience. But when you think about it, as Christians, God speaks to us in baby talk. Because He knows so much more than we could ever understand. And He understands words that we could never grasp. And so when He speaks to us, He puts it on the bottom shelf and tilts it down so we can somehow conceptualize in our lives what He's trying to say to us. For instance, in Hosea chapter 13, verse 8, God is trying to explain to Israel how He feels. And so He takes a scene that they all understand, and He uses this scene to explain to them how He feels in His heart. And this is what He says: like a bear robbed of her cubs, I will attack them and rip them open. He's describing a mother bear who has been robbed of the very reason for her existence. And He uses that as an explanation of how He feels. Now, we're told that black bears have 2 to 3 cubs. And when she only has one, she'll often abandon it, deciding that raising only one baby just isn't worth the effort. But God says that He feels like a bear robbed of her cubs, plural. And it's ripping up His heart. And David in Psalms 22 says this: yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb, you have been my God. And so what David is saying is that even from our mother's womb, God intends that we understand there is a much more perfect parent than our mother. And it is He. It is God Himself. Now, the thing I want to talk about this morning, just for a brief amount of time, is that mothers are called to do God's work. It's a calling. It's a call to ministry. It's a call that you accept for the rest of your life. I came across this, perhaps you've seen it. My mother taught me logic. If everyone else jumped off a cliff, would you do it too? My mother taught me humor. When that lawnmower cuts off your toes, don't come running to me. My mother taught me genetics. You are just like your father. My mother taught me anticipation. Just wait until your father gets home. My mother taught me religion. You better pray that will come out of the carpet. My mother taught me the circle of life. I brought you into this world, and I can take you out. Now, we've been going through the book of Thessalonians on Sunday morning, and I want to remind you of something before we get to our text this morning. Paul and Silas have answered God's call to go to Macedonia, and when they did, they were arrested and beaten and thrown in prison. They were released from prison, and they made the long trip from Amphipolis, which is 33 miles from Philippi, to Apollonia, which is 30 miles from Amphipolis, to Thessalonica, which is 37 miles away from that town. So they've traveled 100 miles from Philippi to Thessalonica. On their backs are still the welts and the wounds of beatings. They are still healing from those moments. And no doubt they're sore and tired, and they need rest. They've walked and walked and walked. And when they arrive in Thessalonica, they are greeted by people who are hungry to hear about Jesus. So even though they're recovering from wounds that were inflicted by angry people, even though they've walked long miles, even though they need rest and they're sore, they share for 3 weeks the good news of Jesus. Paul is a tent maker by day, and after he finishes making his tents, when the sun goes down, he begins to talk to these eager, young, inquisitive Christians about Jesus. And when he writes a letter to them 6 months later, and he's trying to grab a hold of something to describe how they felt when they were sharing these precious moments with these brand new, eager Christians, the first possible word that he comes up with is the word child. Mothers are called to do his work in the world of a child. Listen to what Paul says. He says, we are not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, he said, we were like young children among you. Now, you know there's a difference between an X-ray and a photograph. An X-ray reveals the deepest part of who you are. It exposes the skeleton structure. It exposes the inner part of you. But a photograph just shows the exterior. And little kids don't deal with X-rays. Little kids deal with concrete, not abstract. They deal with what they can see. And there's some disagreement with people in this scripture. Some people think that Paul meant to use the word gentle, not the word child. Because the word gentle is epoi, but the word infant is nepoi. And some people say, well, no, Paul didn't mean that instead we were like children among you. He meant to say, instead we were gentle among you. But I think most manuscripts say he used the word nepoi. And I think with good reason. Because Paul was saying this: I entered your world and I talked baby talk to you. I spoke in a language that you could understand. And we forget that mothers do that. You can tell a mother because a mother can't complete a sentence. A mother is so used to speaking to little ones and so used to using words that they understand that sometimes a mother doesn't use complex sentences. A mother doesn't use adverbs and adjectives. A mother just uses concrete words that speak in baby talk so kids can understand. A man was noticing a 4-year-old boy standing outside the nursery at his church. And he asked the little boy, what are you doing? And the little boy said, well, I'm playing. And the man said, well, what are you playing? And the boy said, well, I'm playing house. And he said, well, why are you by yourself when everybody else in the nursery is playing together in the nursery? Why are you out here by yourself? And he said, well, I can't go in yet. And the man said, well, why not? He said, well, you see, I'm the new baby, and I'm waiting to be born. Now, you see, the little boy, that was a big deal to him. It wasn't something you slough off. It wasn't something you laugh about, because of this little boy, being a new baby was his role in playing house, and so he took it seriously. Much like mothers take seriously little kids and learn to speak baby talk to them. Mothers haven't lost the sense of wonder and mystery at a little kid discovering something new. You know, I've often wondered why in the world Miriam, Moses' older sister, was given the responsibility of watching baby Moses in the ark on the River Nile. Here's a little baby, 3 months old, that his mother has fashioned this ark and placed the ark in the waters of the Nile, and Miriam's responsibility is to watch at a distance. I'm convinced the reason that she was given that responsibility is the mother realized that if the mother watched over the baby, alarms would go off. But if a little kid watched the baby, and if Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe and she saw the little baby in the ark, and there was a little girl, 7 years old, over in the reeds watching this little ark, and she says, do you need someone to help you nurse the baby? That Pharaoh's daughter wouldn't be startled or alarmed by that. But Pharaoh's daughter would be brought into this little, wonderful, beautiful scene where little kids play house. I can still remember this scene. I was visiting a family, and I was in the living room sharing, and a child came into the room, so excited. The child was excited about something that he had discovered for the very first time, and he came bursting into the room wanting to share with his mom and dad something that he'd learned for the first time. And I can still remember the reaction of the parents to their son. You didn't know that? I've known that for the longest time. I can't believe you're just now figuring that out. But a mother, when a little child discovers something new and exciting, something that has opened a whole new world to that child, the mother enters the child's world with eyes of wonder and joy and mystery, and gets down on her knees and speaks baby talk. Paul says, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. We talked your language. Our eyes got wide as yours did. And we were excited with you as you discovered for the very first time that Jesus Christ died for your sins and your burden had been lifted and you've been saved by grace and you don't earn your salvation, but you receive it, and you receive a righteousness that you don't deserve, but that God gives to you. And when you experience that for the very first time, we spoke baby talk to you. And we enjoyed it as you did. A mother is called to do his work and the needs of a child. Now, Paul is trying to find a word to describe how he and Silas related to these brand new Christians. And I want to read something to you that is pretty interesting to me. It's in the book of Numbers, chapter 11. Perhaps you remember Moses is leading 2.5 million people to the promised land. And they're all upset because they're tired of manna. And they want a little meat. And so they're crying out and they're upset because they're tired of eating the same thing over and over and over again. Sound familiar? So listen to what Moses writes in Numbers chapter 11, beginning with verse 10. Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance to their tents. So these people had gathered at the entrance to their tents, and they're looking out over the expanse, and they're wailing. Much like you would experience if you went to the nursery and children were crying. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. Now listen to what Moses said. He asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on earth to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, 'Give us meat to eat.' I can't carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. And if I found favor in your eyes, do not let me face my own ruin." Now, what is Moses saying? He's a man's man. And he's saying this, God, you're asking me to care for these people like a mother. And I'm not a mother. You're asking me to hold them in my arms like a mother nursing a child. And I'm not a mother. And I'm not used to that. I'm not used to that role. I'm not used to that responsibility. I don't have the patience for it. And you're asking me to do something that I'm not equipped to do. I'm out of my element, God. You want me to be a mother. But I'm a man. So listen to what the Apostle Paul says when he's trying to find a word to describe the role that God put them in Thessalonica. He says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 7b to 8, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Paul's saying, I'm trying to find the words to describe how we felt towards you when we first saw you come to faith, and we first saw the excitement in your eyes, and we saw that you'd been born again and that you wanted to serve Jesus. And And I remember all the questions you asked. I remember that you just couldn't get enough, that you wanted to know answers, and you wanted to know them now. And we'd been making tents all day, and we got off their job, and we're sitting down for dinner, and we just needed some time to ourselves. And then you started peppering us with all these questions, and we were like a mother to you. A mother that takes a baby in her arms and nurses that child. A mother who eats a meal to be able to feed her little one. Infants become big by eating little meals. And young Christians become older Christians by eating meals prepared for them by caring adults. Young children become Christian children because of little meals they eat from the knee of their mothers. Chance conversations they have where the child just wants to talk, just wants to ask questions, and the mother stops to answer. I tell you, there's one scripture that blows my mind. It's in Luke chapter 17, verse 23. Jesus is talking about John the Baptist, and he says these words, "Among those born of woman, there is not a greater prophet than John the Baptist." You know why that's so amazing to me? Because John the Baptist's mother was an old woman when she became a mother. She was a rookie at 70 years old. Never had a child. Never rocked a baby to sleep. Never nursed a child. And here she is, 70 years old, being the mother of what Jesus said was the most important man born of a woman. And Elizabeth understood the role of a mother caring for her children, meeting the child's needs. Point number 3, a mother is called to do his work in the life of a child. Now, I want you to listen to what Paul says. He says, "Because we love you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship." Now, do you get this change there? He says we were delighted to share, but then he says in toil and hardship. How can you be delighted to share in toil and hardship? He said, "We work night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed." I'll never forget taking Keisha to the hospital when Carissa was born. We went to St. Paul's, went to the emergency room, parked the car under the canopy there, went inside, got Keisha in a room. They began to prep her for labor, and they asked me if I could go move the car. And everything was going pretty well. I thought, this is a piece of cake, it's no problem. Because when I left, Keisha was in good spirits, everything was going well. I went and parked the car, came back, walked into the room, and she was hyperventilating. And it was such a drastic change from when I left to when I got back. And then came the long hours of labor. And then wheeling her back into the delivery room, and then Carissa was born. And I can still remember this to this day. I can remember going home that night and throwing myself on the bed, thinking to myself, I'm exhausted. And then I quickly remembered, but I haven't done anything. And I can't begin to tell you how much of a wuss I felt like that night. I had not done anything. I just clapped for Casey. You go. You're doing great. And she did all the work. She went through labor. She went all those things. And then I get home and I'm exhausted. And I'm thinking to myself, Key, what's your problem? You didn't do anything. And then when it comes time for Carissa to eat, I'd like to help. I'm not equipped, and I can't do it. And so Keisha had to handle all the eating responsibilities. She handled most of the diaper changing. She did all those things, and I just clapped. And sometimes I didn't clap real loud. There was toil, and there was hardship, and it was night, and it was day. And it was over and over and over and over. Because it was the life of a child that depended on you. And Paul was saying to these people, because we loved you so much, we tried to be like a mother to you. You know, now I know I'm supposed to be done, and I know many of you were hoping that this was going to be a short sermon because I just got out of surgery, and you're hoping that by now the painkillers would be wearing off and it would be time for me to quit. But I do need to say one or two more things, and then we're done. You know, folks, when I counsel people who are getting ready to be married, there's a section in the counseling where we talk about, and how many children do you want to have? And the reason we ask that question is because somebody say, I want 22 kids. And some people say, I want 0.5. You know, and so you have to negotiate how many children you want to have. But in that little section, I say that something like this. I want you to understand that babies are no accident. That God gives life. Lots of people have intimacy all the time, and there is no conception. But when a child is conceived, the child is a gift from God. It is a fruit of your love for one another. It is an expression of your love for each other that God gives to you. And God gives you this baby because God has the highest regard for the giftedness and unique ability you have to raise this child and to give this child values and morals and integrity. So please, if God gives you the privilege of conceiving a child, would you please think seriously about raising the child yourself, at least until the child is 6, before you turn over the raising of this child to an industry? Because daycare centers are people who are hired to become substitute mothers for children. They aren't the children's parents. They're hired guns. They're hired substitutes. They don't have the same values and they don't have the same character that you have. So please, if you do conceive a child and God gives you that gift, would you please think seriously about raising that child yourself? Or at least have a relative or a close, trusted friend that you can turn over that child to, who will raise that baby to have the same morals and values that you have, because you only get one chance to do that. Now, you may disagree with me about that, but I've been sick, and I have a right to say this. When you go to daycare centers, they say, please don't pick up a crying baby. Because if you pick up the baby, then the baby will cry to be picked up every time. And so will all the other babies. So don't give undue attention to crying babies, or you will have all the babies crying. And so children are raised by an industry who don't have any skins in the game. And they are waiting for the parents to show up at 5 or 6 o'clock so they can go home. And I am so thankful that there are churches and Christian institutions who try to provide the right environment for parents to help them raise their children. But we as a church need to all understand that we have a responsibility to our children to raise them up to know the God who called them from their mother's womb, the God who gave them life. Because in a daycare center, the characters change constantly. The turnover rate is high. And we must take it seriously. I don't know if you've ever heard of the cuckoo bird, but the cuckoo bird tricks other birds into raising her youngsters. She will go and lay her eggs in the nest of another bird. And the cuckoo chicks hatch earlier than the other bird's chicks. And they grow faster than the other bird's real brood. And so the cuckoo chicks crowd out the other chicks in the nest and eat up all the food. The mother cuckoo doesn't take seriously her responsibility. Mothers are called to do His work. They're called to enter the world of a child and to be a child. They're called to meet the needs of a child, to nurture and nourish and care for the child. They're called into the life of the child, day and night. When the boogeyman comes in the dark and the child cries out for mom to come, the mother pats down the hall and opens the door because it's the life of her child. Do you still have that calling? Do you still remember what it was like the very first time you heard that baby call you into its life, and you held it close, and you realized that God had called you into an adventure that transformed you into a person you never thought you'd be? And you still have that calling. You're still a mother. And the Apostle Paul, when he wrote this letter to the people at Thessalonica, when he racked his brain to try to think of something to describe the relationship that he felt with these brand new, young, energetic, inquisitive Christians, he grabbed a hold of the Word and he said these words: we were like a mother to you. There is no greater compliment a man can pay a woman than to try to grasp hold of something that transcends anything he could ever describe, And he says, well, when I think about it, when I put my mind to it, and I try to grab hold of the word that describes the moment we shared, well, I guess I'd have to say, even though I probably don't even understand what the words mean, we felt like a mother to you. The psalmist said it this way, yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb, you have been my God. And this is the psalm that Jesus quoted when he was hanging on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? But the psalm goes on.